Actually, guys, can you give me 1 minute? Can I take that call?
Yeah, sure.
Absolutely.
Mike and I are ready to do this podcast with Gerald, and he walks away. Too big, too important for talking to Mike and I. I get it. It's good to be the Gerald, I guess, but
All right, sorry about that.
no problem.
Hello, everyone. Welcome back to another episode of Squat Cobbler. Before we even get started, make sure you subscribe on whatever platform you're choosing to take this in as. I am Dr. Mike at Official Pagan on everything, and joining me, as always.
Hi, everybody. This is Lil Kelly Tool at KELLYTHOL on Twitter and Instagram.
Lil Kelly Tool?
I don't know. Just felt like breaking it up. You got Dr. Mike. I'm trying stuff out.
Okay. I get it. Okay. So Kelly, the SoundCloud rapper.
There you go.
All right, so we are back with a Prisoner Exchange album this week. And this week, I thought we would tackle something by Marilyn Manson. Are you familiar at all with this band, Kelly?
Familiar by name, familiar by reputation, have really never listened to any of their stuff at all.
Okay.
At all.
So to give you a quick little background for anybody who's not familiar, much like Alice Cooper, the Alice Cooper group, there was the band, the Alice Cooper group, who broke up, and then Alice Cooper took on the name. Similar situation with Marilyn Manson. Marilyn Manson started off as a band called Marilyn Manson and the Spooky Kids. They had some independent releases, then a couple of major label albums, and then the band broke up. They did, along the way, shorten their name from Marilyn Manson and the Spooky Kids to just Marilyn Manson. The band broke up, and the singer, Brian Warner, continued on as a solo artist using the name Marilyn Manson, similar to Alice Cooper.
So how long ago did they break up?
So the band broke up in the 90s, late 90s, when they first started to have a great deal of commercial success. After this album, there was a companion piece to this particular record. This was their first major label album. There was some independent releases. This was their first major label album. There was a companion piece released to this, which was their big mainstream break. Then the follow-up album is when the core band started to fall apart. And then after, I believe, maybe one more record after that with a few stragglers from the original band. And then from that point forward, it was just Mr. Warner as the Marilyn Manson moniker.
Was it creative differences? Did the remainder of the band go off and do something else, or did they just...
kind of all went their separate ways. And I'll get into that a little bit, actually, as we get into this. So I am familiar with Marilyn Manson from their pre-album days. So I, as a kid, would get these music zines delivered to my parents' house. And there was a couple articles in there about this band, Marilyn Manson. So I got interested in them. I tracked down some of these self-released recordings. And then I got to spend a summer on the West Coast. When the band happened to be touring on the West Coast, the person who was supposed to be watching me decided to leave me with somebody who was related to somebody in the band to take me to a show. And I got to spend a bunch of time with the band as a 12-year-old, 11-year-old, something like that, on the road with a band, which is pretty cool. Got to hang out on the West Coast as an 11 or 12-year-old with the band Marilyn Manson, just as they were really starting to make a name for themselves. I want to say over the course of like that next year after that is when they really hit the mainstream as the band, and then the band started to dissolve shortly after that. But it was pretty cool because I got to come back to school and tell everybody what I did on my summer vacation that year, prior to us using that as a title for a video. I got to tell everybody what I did. And then for Christmas that year, I got a present from Marilyn Manson, the band, shipped to my house, which is probably not what was happening with a lot of kids around that time. But more so than any other band directly, this is probably why I'm a musician, because of my association with them as a young kid. And I actually stayed friends with the founding guitar player, Scott, who unfortunately passed away not long ago. After a battle with cancer. So I wanted to talk about one of their albums and also brag about something that I got recently that is related to them. So I figured we would start with their first proper commercial major label record. So for anybody who doesn't know the backstory of the band, they are from Florida. They were started by Brian Warner and Scott Pateski. They had some indie releases, and then they solidified a lineup of the band, a core lineup, and they recorded this album and the record company didn't like it. So they went back and re-recorded the entire album with Trent Reznor from Nine Inch Nails producing this time. So Trent Reznor kind of gave them their break somewhat. They had a little bit of a following in the South and along the East Coast. And then Brian Warner was working as a music journalist, and he got in with Nine Inch Nails a little bit, got some shows opening for them, and then Trent Reznor decided to sign them through an imprint that he had just started with Interscope Records to release this album. Well, what became this album, because they recorded it twice. If you were interested, anybody who's listening, in the original version of the album, that somehow mysteriously made its way online a couple years ago. So you can find it, the long lost original version. But we are here to talk about the proper release of it. And I feel like we should start with the artwork. What were your thoughts on that, sir?
So kind of what I expected a Marilyn Manson cover to look like, I guess. It's just there's a lot going on. I kind of almost want to draw a parallel to Hey Stupid, to where it's one of those ones where it's like, wow, there's like a lot here. Some editing may be nice. So it was okay. I kind of probably had the same concerns I did with the Hey Stupid cover, which is that it was just like too much.
I can totally see that. And the album cover, of a lot of the artwork associated with this was done by Mr. Warner himself, who at the time was doing all their concert flyer artwork and the artwork for their indie records. Those independent releases, many of the songs off of here are actually re-recordings of songs from those earlier releases. So if you were a fan of the band prior to them getting any sort of mainstream recognition, you're familiar with a lot of the material that's on here. It's just been refined and polished a great deal compared to those earlier versions. And let's jump right into it. It opens with the introduction prelude, The Family Trip. This is so in the early days of the band, they incorporated a lot of visual elements from kids' movies as a way to sort of juxtapose their initially very politically leaning, more punk rock attitude that you do get throughout this record, and we'll touch on a little bit, which was replaced with more of a, I want to say, general shock rock and more of the Alice Cooper vein after that, but more specifically political on this first record. And they, like I said, juxtapose that with references to family movies and particularly kids movies. In this case, Willy Wonka. This is a monologue from the Willy Wonka movie.
Yeah, so the Willy Wonka, immediate appearance of Willy Wonka lines from the movie in a Marilyn Manson album was a bit of a surprise to me. The playlist you shared with me, we go a little bit deeper. We actually return back to the boat ride scene that this comes from, and is featured heavily in a video supporting one of the future songs. So I wasn't really sure in the Willy Wonka movie. There were a couple times when Gene Wilder was particularly creepy in that movie. This particular section, when he gives this particular speech, is probably the worst or the most creepy he is in the whole thing. And I really didn't think it could get more unpleasant, but they did an excellent job in making it even more unpleasant. It is almost Alice-y like delivery. It's a very Cooper-esque like delivery. So if Alice was doing the Willy Wonka speech in the boat or the rhyme in the boat, it'd be very similar like that. So I thought it was pretty intriguing, a very kind of clever little piece, and it definitely got my attention.
Very nice. Well, that brings us to the proper first song of the album, Cake and Sodomy.
Yeah.
Did you have, before we even talk about the song, was there initial reaction maybe that you had to the title?
Yeah. Yeah, I didn't figure that this was going to be making my top playlist going into it.
So is this, before, all right, top line reaction then, was this the album where you were like, pass?
Actually, by the time I'm done, no. It's not a, oh, give me more, please, right away either. But early on, I was like, I don't know. Particularly the Wonka stuff was cool. They go, this song, we'll talk about it. I warmed to it as we went a little bit further through, and I kind of went back and reflected on some of the other songs. At the end of it, I didn't dislike this. There are some songs like this one that I found musically pretty solid. Lyrically, I can pretty much live without this one. It's a very catchy chorus. It's a chorus I'll never be repeating as I walk into wherever I'm going at any point in time. But musically, I thought it was cool. It was driving. I'm not a particularly strong fan of the lyrical content of this song.
I can see that. And this So I'm a big fan of this song in general. One of my favorites of their earlier material, particularly musically. I love Scott's guitar riff on this. One of the things though about this early incarnation of the band, it's definitely more punk influenced, and that includes the sort of the political-ish element that punk had in more of a generalized like anti-establishment way, not in a political party leaning kind of way. But this song in particular does sort of focus on mocking the Southern Bible Belt area.
Yeah, mocking might be a little gentle in terms of
some light ribbing.
Yeah, perhaps stronger.
Just gentle banter. Peaceful discourse with the American South.
Yeah, I'm sure he was really popular down there. Well, he's from Florida. He should be all right.
Yeah, see, they're Southern. It's okay. I'm sure nobody was offended.
No, not at all.
Ironically, though, this early record mostly at the time flew under the radar. It did get them a much, much wider fan base, but this is not why people know who they are. The controversy comes much later. And what's interesting is this record is by far their most shocking in terms of the material on there, but it's not until later that they kind of become infamous. And at that time, their records are, compared to this, extremely sanitized with almost nothing that anybody could realistically find objectionable on there. Maybe some mild profanity. So this is ironically the record that people would probably object to things on.
Yeah, and on this song in particular, they get right to it. Pretty much out of the gate.
What was that line?
I can't recall at this point, but it was like it was right away. It was like there's a Kiss song called "God of Thunder," and I think it was in that milieu, but I just can't extemporaneously recall what it was.
That particular line that Kelly can't recall, I won't say for his own editing sanity, but it was plastered on a lot of their early t-shirts. My parents loved that I had that.
Yeah, I'm sure. It's a conversation starter with the high school principal and everyone else, I'm sure.
I wasn't even in high school.
That's right. You'd be like elementary.
This is grade school. This was actually, I want to say it was maybe the summer, either right before or right after 8th grade. Somewhere right around there.
It could have been Cakes and Shotguns, and it'd have been fine. He could have been the god of shotguns, but no.
You feel like it would have gotten the same message across?
I think that gentle ribbing you were talking about, he could have accomplished. He went a different path.
All right, so moving right along, one of their more popular early songs, this had appeared on their independent releases. One of my favorites, I want to say this was my introduction to the band, actually. And it was probably their first, proper music video released. I know that it was released as a single off of this. I love this song. I love the riff in the song. Unfortunately, I feel like the message hasn't aged well. This is another political fight the man kind of song that I think would be lost on most people these days. It was too topical, which is one of the issues that I take with sort of topical political themes in records. They don't necessarily age well. And this is one of those songs. I love the song still, but I feel like most people would be hard pressed unless you were really familiar with this very specific issue at the time to tell you what this song was about. So were you familiar, Kelly? Did this immediately jump out at you as what this was?
As far as a particular topic, no, I got after I overcame my initial pleasant surprise of a 6-year-old dropping the F-bomb to start the song off. After I cleared that, I felt there was a bullying element to it, but I didn't know there was a topical reference.
There is. So at this time, so I don't know if you remember, Kelly, but prior to the point when this song was recorded, and that little kid dropping the F-bomb was on the original version as well. So they had to bring that kid back out to re-record it for the proper album. So this song, around the time that it came out, if you remember, lunch boxes in schools used to be made of metal.
Yep.
And then there was a point where they switched over to plastic. That was actually because of a federal law that declared lunch boxes weapons in the early 90s.
I totally missed that.
Yeah, it was a big, I remember being a kid in school and they had to inspect our lunch boxes. They sent people home for having metal lunch boxes. And it was a big deal if you were a kid in school in the early 90s. So it's something that hasn't, and that's what the F-bomb reference of the person will get his medal in the beginning. It's mocking sort of the federal government that millions and millions of tax dollars were spent having hearings to determine whether a child's lunchbox is a deadly weapon that kids are carrying in school that they will use to murder each other. And it was decided that they are in fact deadly weapons. And they stopped making metal lunchboxes for a long time. So that's why when you see the metal or tin lunchboxes now, they are marked as collectibles because you are not allowed to market a metal lunchbox.
I was a paper bag guy, so I missed the whole lunchbox controversy.
The lunchbox. See, and I love this song. I really do. But when you make things that are so specifically topical like that, as a kid, I was like, oh, that's cool. They're singing about this thing that's actually affecting me. As an adult, I'm like, oh yeah, I kind of remember that. And unless you were in school at that exact time, you're probably mostly unaware of it.
But gotta throw down at the playground. Pretty good line. Gotta like that.
Well, I do think the lyrics are clever, juxtaposing the idea of like little kids on the playground as warring gang factions. I thought that was pretty funny. The first incarnation of this album that they ended up having to re-record, there's a lot of material on it that's better on that version. This is not one of those times. This song was greatly improved by the re-recording, particularly in Mr. Warner's delivery. And I assume at the behest of Trent Reznor, who had taken over the reins of the recording, he completely changed his delivery to more of a shouted sort of punk style. It was more of a mock faux rapping in the original version, and it just didn't work. This is a dramatically improved version of the song. It's a song I really enjoy. I know it's a staple of their live shows even to this day. It's a popular song. I really enjoy it. But again, the reference probably didn't age that well. And that brings us to Organ Grinder. So Organ Grinder is a song that I like, but it's honestly greatly improved. As I mentioned earlier, there is a companion piece to this album, which actually outsold this album, which is an interesting thing. So later on this album, as Kelly alluded to, there was a song called Dope Hat. Dope Hat became a somewhat popular music video. That's what really started to get the band attention. So they wanted to rush out a remix to Dope Hat to get something on the radio and get a new product out. So they were going to release a single with some remixes, and then it sort of evolved into an EP and then a sort of short companion album to this. And that album was called Smells Like Children. And it is reworked versions of a few of the songs from this record. Instead of just doing a remix, they completely deconstructed the songs and recorded new, very different versions of them. The version of this song on that is actually superior to this one, in my opinion. But ironically, that album ended up becoming their breakout, even though most people didn't know they were sort of one behind at that point, and really you needed to listen to this one first because it included a cover of the Eurythmics song Sweet Dreams, which ended up becoming their first like radio hit song. And recently, I have been lucky enough to acquire from the director of the Sweet Dreams music video some of the actual animation cells that they use. So the way that they produced that video was taking a bunch of stills and then animating the stills, because this was pre-CGI and filters on your phones where you can do things like this to give it sort of a distorted, jerky look to all of their movements. And the director was very kind in order to provide me with some of the actual stills that they used to do the animation for the video. So those are in our studio now. So I'll have to include a photo for you to add on to the blog post for that. But I do like this song. It's a little bit heavier than what's come before it at this point, but the version on Smells Like Children is better.
This was actually my favorite song so far. It's got a nice kind of hook to it. The music's driving, so I do like it. I do like it quite a bit. I was a bit conflicted because, and this is a bit of a tangent, and I apologize, but are you familiar, Mike, with the band Toad the Boner and the Bingo Brothers?
Yes, I have heard of that band, actually.
Highly influential. You know, the Stones were influenced by him, the Who, Pagan, also heavily influenced by Toad the Boner and the Bingo Brothers. A lot of folks don't know that Organ Grinder was the final song written for the original Toad the Boner and the Bingo Brothers album, Toad the Boner and the Bingo Brothers group, which was 3/5 Ukrainian, I'd like to point out, but we never got around to recording it. And so I thought maybe Marilyn was ripping me off here, but he wasn't. And so it's an entirely different theme on Organ Grinder. So that threw me a little bit, but even I was able to step away from that. It was a good song. And I really did, like I said, my favorite so far, a really good driving song. Kind of, you know, as you would expect, you get a little bit of the Organ Grinder-esque musical interlude at the beginning before it slams into the song with great earnest, but a good song.
Excellent. So that brings us to Cyclops, the ballad, I would say. of the album. Power ballad-esque. Would you agree with that, sir?
Yeah, I guess. Yeah, sure. I'll go with that.
If there were a power ballad on this album, it's this song.
Yeah, especially as you kind of towards the last third, it becomes power ballad-esque.
This was one of my favorite songs, I think, when I was younger. And then as I've gotten older, it's probably slid down the list for me. What did you think of this one?
Yeah, I'd probably align with your older self in that, in terms of everything I've heard so far, it wasn't kind of reaching to the tops for me. I think any song about a Cyclops where you do introduce dilate as a major lyrical construct is pretty clever, so that's good, points to them for that. But an okay thing in the shift towards the end, and tempo was interesting, but just in terms of some of the power and stuff that I'd heard before, it wasn't top one for me.
I totally understand that and agree with it. Now, we're getting to Dope Hat. Dope Hat was one of the more popular songs off this record, as I mentioned, and spawned what became the companion piece to this, Smells Like Children, which was their breakout. Dope Hat was interesting because I remember hearing about the band through, like, reading about them through zines, getting my hands on some of their music, meeting the band. You could always gauge when I was a kid how popular a band was getting by how prolific their t-shirts would appear on things, and particularly when you went to like touristy spots, like if you went to one of the shore towns on the East Coast or anything like that. I remember one year going and seeing like 2 or 3 other people with Marilyn Manson t-shirts out of the 1,000 people that I walked past in a day or two. Then the next summer, like when Dope Hat had kind of started playing, I remember seeing it on MTV a couple of times and then seeing it a bunch of times on MTV's at the time biggest competitor, The Box. All of a sudden there was a noticeable shift of a lot more kids with Marilyn Manson t-shirts on after this. And as Kelly mentioned, this goes further into the Willy Wonka territory with it. It's probably my favorite song after Cake and Sodomy on this record. What did you think of this one, sir?
I liked it quite a bit. Lyrically, another really kind of strong outing, or the Fail to See the Anguish in My Eyes, just really good. We get some of the tragic turning to magic towards the end, which is another kind of very clever turn of phrase, which is really good. So I liked the song a lot. The video, I'm not as big a fan of, to be honest with you. Oompa Loompas possibly getting busy is not my thing outside of that, but it was a different take on the Willy Wonka experience.
That it is. And I think it's also worth noting this is sonically closer to what's coming after this in later records. Whereas I think the rest of this album has definitely a more noticeable punk rock sort of sound. You get a little bit more of the sort of arena rock and industrial elements that come through much stronger on later efforts. So that brings us to the most overtly political song on the entire album, Get Your Gun with 2 N's. Now, what did you think when you saw this title, sir?
I was confused. Because I was like, Peter Gunn? Because I didn't really... The title threw me with the extra N outside of artistic selection. Exclusively on the title, I really didn't know what I was going to be getting into, but I had a feeling it might not stay apolitical.
I don't know if you did any research into it.
Nope.
So the title... And again, this is one of those things that at the time, I think a lot of people would have recognized, but now that a lot of time has passed, it is a very specific reference that probably would elude many, many people. The general, once again, anti-establishment feel of the song comes through, but it is specifically referencing, there was a Dr. Gunn who was killed by pro-life protesters who murdered him to prove how much they valued life. So, which, seems somewhat contradictory. The song is specifically referencing that. He was a doctor who, I think he'd done some work with Planned Parenthood, so he was getting some protests. He was, I guess, a successful doctor, not like a local PCP or anything like that. I remember this being on the news, and he was killed by some protesters. And, in interviews with them on the news, they were doing it to show everybody how much they supported life by killing people. So that's what the song is specifically referencing. Again, the most overtly political song, but again, I would say, and this is why, and I've said this before with numerous bands, and again, this is with a band that I really enjoy. So on an album I really enjoy, I couldn't say I like all of their material, but on an album that I really enjoy, being overtly political, and this is why I veer away from it, in addition to potentially alienating people, it dates you. Not in the way that being, anti-establishment might date you, because that's something that I think multiple generations can appreciate and can span time. This is something that's referencing a very specific event. And while Google is a thing, I think that nowadays most people would probably see Two Ends as an artistic choice and probably not do a lot of research into the backstory. Similar to Cake and Sodomy in its sort of general anti-establishment view.
Not a lot to add. I think definitely a driving song, clearly anti-establishment. The commentary about pseudo-morals kind of fits with the situation that they're calling back to a little bit, which, is a fair point, but it is one of those things that gets a little risky on how quickly it dates itself out, depending how topical it gets. But it's a good driving song. I liked it.
All right, sir. That brings us to Wrapped in Plastic. I always liked this song, but I liked it in part too because are you a Twin Peaks guy at all, Kelly?
No, I'm not.
Okay, so this song references the show Twin Peaks. Much like Nine Inch Nails, the band Marilyn Manson was very influenced by the work of filmmaker David Lynch. Trent Reznor has contributed a lot to some David Lynch projects. Mr. Warner and another member of the band actually appeared in one of his films and contributed songs to his films as well. But that all kind of started here. The title is a reference to the first episode of Twin Peaks, a famous line from that, and there's some references to it in the lyrics as well.
So the bass line, the early bass in this is really cool. I like that quite a bit. I think probably missing all the Twin Peaks references didn't help me out a lot on this song because it didn't stand out to me versus some other things as much. I think had I had that connection a little bit more, it would have been a little richer, deeper for me. But it was good. It's a good, solid song. I said I really did like the bass.
Very nice. I like the bass on this song as well. Fun fact for everybody. So longtime bassist Twiggy Ramirez is pictured with the band on this album, but does not actually play bass on this record. He replaced the bassist that recorded everything on this record and came in just as they were doing the photo shoots and things like that. So he's not actually on this album. And that brings us to Dogma, folky, sort of with a country western vibe, completely the antithesis of everything we've seen up until this point. I would say soothing.
So I'd go with you kind of on country, but it's power country. It is power hillbilly, whatever you want to call it from there.
Power, I like that. Power hillbilly.
Hillbilly.
That's a band name.
There you go. Power hillbilly a little bit. The drums in this are particularly cool. Fun to listen to on that. Yeah, I'd go with you. It's fun. It's definitely a change of pace. Dogma's the title, and as you might expect, kind of thematically runs through the lyrics quite a bit. Yeah, I thought it was good.
Okay, and that brings us to Sweet Tooth. So in our previous episode, we had mentioned sort of, vocal effects and things like that. You get a little bit of that, I would say almost not dissimilar to the hurdy-gurdy band sort of effect, but toned down dramatic compared to that, but a similar type of vocal effect. Fun fact with this one, this song was used in the soundtrack to the movie Strangeland, which was released well after this album. So they obviously curated it to a sense of going back, not just picking a current Marilyn Manson song or getting them to record something, but sort of going back through and finding something that fit the scene really well, which I thought was cool. You don't usually see that in soundtracks to movies. Typically, they're just picking stuff that is sonically topical at the time.
So really, really cool introduction. The opening of this song. I don't know if there is such a thing as a goth submarine, but if there is a goth submarine, this is exactly what it would sound like at the very beginning. And then we get into, which I'm assuming is chewing because it's Sweet Tooth, and there's some stuff going on. But the very beginning of the stuff, just some really cool audio stuff going on that I think is really, really fun. The bass builds up to some really good guitar stuff. There's interesting things done with the vocals, as you mentioned. A very interesting song, a lot of stuff going on with it. I really loved the very, very beginning of it quite a bit. So overall good. And I did like as always, that idea of when you get kind of that, whether it's a single guitar or a bass, and then you kind of start to layer in additional guitars and build up against it. That's usually a winner for me, and it was a winner for me on this song.
Very nice. It is a song that I really like on this album, and I think it's aged well. And that brings us to Snake Eyes and Sissies. Back to the more punk rock, sort of driving rock elements to this, but not in the specifically political way, just more of a general commentary on the burgeoning MTV generation of the time. So it doesn't really date itself, I would say, but definitely more in that punk rock vibe.
I don't think you can ever accuse Marilyn Manson of sounding funky, but there's almost a funk-like as close as Marilyn Manson's going to get to a funk-like delivery of lyrics that occurs in this song, which so points for that. It's it is the kind of the little guy and the big evil corporation thematic kind of running through there. It's not an unusual theme to hear from those who are disgruntled. I did almost pick up, and I don't know if you would agree with this or not, but there was almost a Blue Oyster Cult feel. It was really for the first time in listening through this, where as I was going through, particularly kind of later Blue Oyster Cult, oh, okay, that's kind of in that camp a little bit, which is not, it's a metal, not a punk kind of thing, but I did kind of get a little bit of a BOC vibe there towards the end. I thought it was a really strong song. I did like it. Yeah,
I really enjoyed this song as well. But it brings us to a very interesting song on the record, My Monkey. Now, similar to Butthole Surfers in our previous review, this is sort of half a cover and half an original song, which is an interesting approach. It's different. I would say half a cover in the sense that it's different than, say, rap songs, particularly of the 90s, where they were sampling big chunks of earlier songs for their choruses and things like that. This is something that is a straightforward cover in part and then switches over to an original song, which is an odd sort of approach to it. So it has elements of a Charles Manson song in there, which of course we are Beach Boys fans here. So there's always has to be a little Charles Manson and things there. So it's partially a Charles Manson song and then partially an original. The mashup works pretty well though. I feel like they found a melodic through line that makes it sound like one cohesive song. Even though if you listen to those songs separately, they are very, very different.
So I'm going to need you to clarify for me the line, along came a choo-choo and knocked my monkey's cuckoo, and now the monkey's dead. Is that Charles Manson or Marilyn Manson?
Charles Manson.
That makes a lot of sense now.
That section, starting with the I had a little monkey, I sent him to the country, all the way up to that, is from a Charles Manson song.
Lovely. Okay. Yeah, it definitely caught my attention, that particular thing. Sanity is a little box. I don't know if is that Marilyn or Chuck.
That's Marilyn.
Okay, good. I mean, it was interesting. I would not have, I didn't do the research on it to know that this was actually a pistache of a couple things there, but I thought it hung together really well. Like I said, not noticeable. You mentioned that kind of as well. Charles did an okay job with his monkey lyrics there. They're okay, I guess. But
you need a guy to write lyrics about monkeys. Charles Manson's your guy.
He's on it big time. So
sad though, his giraffe period never took off.
Yep, it's a shame.
All right, and that brings us to the final song on the album, Misery Machine. So it references Aleister Crowley in the lyrics, but doesn't necessarily follow through with that. It's just sort of a throwaway reference, but it appears a couple times throughout the lyrics. Again, back to the sort of driving, almost punkish kind of vibe that a lot of this record has. Not political though, so I feel like it's aged better.
So not on the top of the list for me on this album. It was solid. It was okay. Didn't have a big issue with it. Highway 666. It's a nice little call out. Obviously, the little vignette at the end of the song it's interesting, where you get the phone ringing and ringing and ringing for quite a long time before it picks up and gets what I will assume will be an actual recording of an actual mother requesting that their child be removed from the band's mailing list and nothing ever be sent again. Was a nice little way to kind of wrap things up, I thought.
Yes, no, and I agree with that. My understanding is that was in fact an actual recording. I'm not sure. I've never done any sort of fact checking on that, but that's my understanding of it.
She sounds pretty genuine.
And that carries over in the companion piece to this album, Smells Like Children, where there is clips of interactions with fans at shows from the tour supporting this.
That'd be pretty cool to hear.
Well, I was almost going to recommend that one, but I feel like you needed to hear this to have some sort of context for that, because a lot of the songs are reworkings of songs from this and then a few cover songs mixed in.
Of all the Prisoner Exchanges so far, I said this one wouldn't be climbing to the top of the pile for me. It was good to actually kind of get through an entire run here a little bit. And in here, there's some parts of it that I enjoyed quite a bit. Other parts I probably live without, but overall I said it was a good exposure. So I appreciate you rolling this one in as an option.
And as far as their catalog beyond this point, whether it's the actual band or Brian solo as Marilyn Manson, it's significantly, after this and its companion piece, it is significantly more sanitized than this, which is funny because they become so much more controversial later down the line when there is almost nothing on the records that you could point at as being problematic.
Yeah, and that was the weird thing. So the playlist you shared with me as I went through this, every song on the playlist after the title of the song had parenthetical explicit lyrics, except for Get Your Gun, which did not have that parenthetical. And every song except Get Your Gun was untouched in its full glory. F-bombs away all the way through. Get Your Gun was a censored version that I lost count of the number of beeps that were there, but there are a significant number of edits that occurred. A Squat Cobbler-esque number of edits that occurred in Get Your Gun, but they were all beeped out. So I thought it was kind of strange that was the one, and maybe it was sourced from like Vimeo or something like that, and they had already tidied it up or something like that. But I thought that was kind of weird.
I think that's what it is, because this is what I sent you was the official YouTube playlist version of the album, and sometimes they will source things from a music video upload or from somewhere else. So I'm assuming that that's what happened with that.
Yeah, lots of beeps.
And Get Your Gun was like pushed as the main single off of this record. It was Get Your Gun and Lunchbox, and then Dope Hat was released later, and that actually ended up outperforming those and led to the companion album.
Excellent.
All right, well, I'm glad you didn't hate it, sir.
One of these days it'll happen.
I'm glad it wasn't this, because I do have a personal connection to this album. I, as a young, impressionable child, got to hang out with this band.
Yeah, and so and maybe you were an influence on them.
Well, an argument could be I'm not gonna stir anything up. I'm happy to have the original photos from the video shoot and my memories with the band.
Yeah, and definitely get me that cell, picture of that cell. We'll get that in the blog post. That'll be very cool.
All right, sir. Well, thank you, everybody, for sharing this with us. I hope you've liked and subscribed by now. Anything you need to add, sir?
Nothing else, except this is probably the last appearance of Lil Kelly Tool. We'll work on a new one for the next one.
So you're just not, you don't think it's going to stick?
I'm not feeling it. No, not that one.
Okay.
All right. Thanks for listening, everybody.
Thanks, everybody.
So it's